Hi everybody, this is John from DM Shower Thoughts, and today we are continuing our little series on breaking down subclasses by tier with the Warlock. So, I've been repeating the reminders a lot, so if you haven't been keeping up, basically there are tiers, it goes in descending order. You have S, A, B, C, D, F. F is the worst, S is the best. Really, I'm looking at each of these subclasses through the lens of a single class build, levels 1 through 20. And just in general, kind of my experience with them, how powerful they are, how fun to play. Although if I give a class a low ranking and you've had a lot of fun with it, that's no comment on like your definition of fun, right? Usually, and actually I don't really honestly foresee any other subclass getting like F tier. Really, it was only the Battle Rager that was that bad. It's so bad it exists in a tier of its own, which is kind of rare. But to kind of describe the other rankings, D tier is usually a class that has a decent concept but is just mechanically failing in a way that makes it really, really difficult for me to recommend. So while the story could be awesome, the raw statistical power is so underwhelming that I just see players getting disappointed with its performance. C tier is usually pretty standard. Usually these options are kind of either generic or their mechanics are just boring, or again, they're kind of underwhelming. Whereas B tier not only has an exciting concept, it has a pretty good execution. But B tier also, these classes tend to just be situational, where they're really fun to play if you have the right party composition, or you have the right campaign setting. But outside of those specific circumstances, a lot of times these classes can be less effective than some of their subclass cousins that are in A tier. A tier tends to be just solid class design. I don't really have mean things to say about them. The only thing that separates A tier from S tier is S tier either fulfills a concept so well, or it's just such a well-rounded, well-performing subclass, I can like recommend it above all others. Looking back on it, Bard was kind of an outlier, because I gave two different subclasses the S tier treatment in Bard, but it's because one of them fulfilled 5th edition Bard's story identity, and one of them really fulfilled the Bard's unique mechanical identity in a way that I just couldn't help but put eloquence and lore on the same S tier ranking. Really, we haven't gotten a lot of other subclasses of that. There are some classes that don't have any S tier subclasses. However, those same classes also had quite a few A tier, and actually I'd prefer a class with a whole bunch of A tier options than one S tier and then a whole bunch of options that are lackluster. Mostly because it means I'm going to be seeing a lot of diverse characters at the table that even if they have the same base class, they're going to be able to operate differently and distinctively, which only creates for cooler combinations. With the Warlock, if you remember when I originally did my tier list of the 13 official core classes, Warlock was one of 3 classes that ended up in overall C tier ranking. The others being the Fighter and the Ranger. And if you watch the Ranger video, you know I have lots of mean things to say about Ranger design. And the Fighter design mostly, as a whole, the Fighter subclasses have pretty interesting mechanics, but they don't address a core problem, which is the fighter's dependence on equipment. Whereas even the Paladin and the Barbarian, if you're not going to deal damage, they have secondary roles to play. Alright, I'm gonna have to use this thingy to keep your attention. Oh, how fun! It's like fishing. With the Warlock, the reason it was kind of a C tier class, I find no matter what the Warlock subclass looks like, almost every single class Warlock build starts to kind of look the same, that even when I see people try different stuff, it always usually ends up to some kind of Eldritch Blast, Agonizing Blast build. And really that's kind of unfortunate, because I think the Warlock from a storytelling perspective has so much more to offer. The Warlock also has kind of a weak action economy. Especially the higher in level that you get, you tend not to use your bonus actions a whole lot. Warlock shines when it multi-classes with another charisma caster, particularly the sorcerer. And because of that, I tend really not to see single-class Warlock builds. The one build that I did see, I had accidentally recommended, the player seemed like bored with it, because even though she knew she could cast like 2 really big spells, when you're sitting next to a cleric and a wizard that can also cast really big spells, and you're not getting more times to be able to use it, you know, because everyone's always recharging on a long rest anyway, it can really make this style feel stale. It's pretty much use your action Eldritch Blast, next turn, same thing, rinse, wash, repeat. Oh, maybe this time we'll cast one of those 3rd level spells at 5th level. Ooh, 2 extra damage dice. How exciting. And really, so as I'm talking through the Warlock subclasses, that is going to be a very relevant design conversation that's going to be a major component of how I rank these. So first is going to be the Fiend Warlock, which is kind of like the generic option in the SRD and in the player's handbook. The Fiend Warlock gets an A tier from me. As far as it being the generic option, I don't have anything mean to say about it. Fiend Warlock really leans into what most people think of as a Warlock right out of the gate. Kind of this Faustian figure that has made a deal with a power that is malicious and beyond them. And they've usually I find most people, they don't really like serving an evil entity. Mostly they're kind of a morally gray figure that has this kind of sinister bent to their power. But sometimes they have a heart of gold on the inside. With Fiend Warlock's mechanics, just even right at first level, being able to get temporary hit points when you terminate an enemy creature, that's a really nice ability. Even if you dip 1 level into Warlock for Eldritch Blast, that's a really good ability. And it only gets better. Like, its ability to gain just a damage resistance at 10th level, that can rotate every short rest. So again, if you are doing a dungeon crawl, or you know what enemy you're going to be fighting, like if you're fighting, say, like a fire elemental and you take fire resistance, it actually isn't so bad being a little bit more of a survivable caster. Its final ability, the level 14 Hurl Through Hell, is powerful, cinematic. You don't get to see it a whole lot because not a lot of people really invest in Warlock, but it really does add a certain touch that you can't really replicate with anything else in 5th edition. And Fiend Warlock is just pretty cool. Is it the best caster? No, but in terms of comparing it to the other subclasses and what it does to accentuate the core class's story and mechanics, got nothing real mean to say about Fiend Warlock. Which brings us to Archfey. Archfey, I really like the design. I haven't talked about this yet. One of the things I really appreciate from the Warlock design, you have a very broad choice in terms of the cosmological connection of your character. So, for example, when you make a cleric, it's going to be something divine. Even if it's like a dark god or something, it's going to be some kind of worship. Warlocks, you could have a Fiend Warlock, an Archfey, an alien like aberration or a great old one. You could have a celestial. Warlocks, they run the gamut. In terms of execution, this is one that I give C tier because it's one of those that's pretty cool at low levels, but it only gets worse as you go. The capstone in particular is really, really weak. You just make a saving throw and I charm you. Ha ha! As a 14th level character, the things you'll be fighting at 14th level, to have your capstone ability be you're charmed or you're frightened, it's like the same as your 1st level ability. I don't get it. And your 1st level ability, the Fey Presence, is powerful for a 1st level character. But as you kind of go up through the different threats that you fight in higher tiers of play, they're gonna be immune to Charmed and Frightened. Charmed and Frightened is only gonna take you so far in D&D. It does get access to Fairy Fire and Sleep, which can make it an interesting negotiator. I do think that Archfey has a place in kind of the party's composition, but its mechanics are just a little underwhelming. This is one where, again, I'm judging the mechanics as is, but if you're a DM, feel free to homebrew a little bit. Give your Archfey Warlock a bone. Give him some kind of special power alongside Charm! And that brings us to Great Old One. Great Old One, I like how mechanically distinct it is from Fiend. In terms of, like, how similar they both seem to have distant, sinister patron vibes. I think the Great Old One is a little creepier, and obviously it's more dealing in things like psychic damage and telepathy and, you know, really being kind of overall spooky, existential creepy instead of I'm gonna set you on fire creepy. The Great Old One, I think, has a strong story identity in terms of 5th edition. Create Thrall. Again, it's a charm effect, but at least there's not a save. You're just like, boop, you listen to me now, bub. And I don't think that's too bad, but again, it's no hurl through hell. Overall, Great Old One, I give it a B. I think the people that are gonna want super creepy Warlock are gonna play up super creepy Warlock, and they're gonna have a lot of fun with that more than trying to min-max how much damage they can do. And that now brings us to Sword Coast Adventurer's Guide, which has been a bag of beans in terms of what it's produced for us. It's given us Battle Rager. It's given us Blade Singer. Oh! It's given us Arcana Domain. Hey! So where does the Undying Warlock fit on our tier list? And the Undying Warlock fits in D tier. I actually started when I was like thinking about this video. I was like, do I really want to keep F and D tier around? Because so far, the only D tier subclass has been Storm Herald, and the only F tier has been Battle Rager. And I really don't think there's going to be anything else that's as bad as Battle Rager. But in terms of, we're talking about Undying Warlock. And with Undying, really cool concept, has a place in a party's composition or a character's story. Mechanically, the Sanctuary you get from Undead, and it only gets worse from there. The capstone is, there's one really cool flavor thing with the capstone where you can reattach severed limbs. That's pretty cool. Investing 14 levels in Warlock just to get that is not worth it. Its spell list is pretty meh. It's kind of touted as like, oh, it's a survivable Warlock. But it's not gonna compete with the Fiend's ability to just pop somebody with an Eldritch Blast and get some temp HP back. So overall, I would say that Undying gets the D tier. Which now brings us to Xanathar's Guide to Everything. These are the only 2 Warlock subclasses we get. First being the Celestial Warlock. I gotta be honest, I like Celestial Warlock, mostly because it addresses a thing with Warlock that Warlocks don't really get to use their bonus action a whole lot. Unlike sorcerers that can meta magic and quicken and be all like that. Warlocks get Hex, which is great at like levels 1 and 2. Level 3 to 5, Hex is alright, but again, you're starting to give up one of your high-ranking spell slots to be able to focus on something and deal at a d6 extra damage when you Eldritch Blast. And to me, it starts to become like, you don't want to use those spell slots for something a little more level appropriate. Like, Hex is like Hunter's Mark. It's better than Hunter's Mark, and Hunter's Mark is cool. Hunter's Mark is like the Ranger staple. But the Ranger never loses its first level spell slots and has to use its 3rd level spell slots to use Hunter's Mark. Celestial Warlock, because it's healing light as a bonus action and you get more dice as you level, ends up coming a lot in handy. It gives the Warlock kind of this compromised role of not really being the best damage dealer. It ends up being a competitive damage dealer and a clutch healer. I probably wouldn't recommend a Celestial Warlock over, say, a Druid or a Cleric in terms of fulfilling the healer role for the party, but having a strong pivot that does not require a spell to use a bonus action healing ability, meaning You can do like super big action spell for a 3rd level spell slot and then healing light on the side. Celestial Warlock I found has been really functional, and I've got a player that's played like 4 of them, and she loves it to death. She just thinks it's like the greatest. So who am I to argue with her? In my experience, Celestial Warlock has been really, really good. Not better than Fiend Warlock, but also it earns its spot in B tier, definitely. And that brings us to our last subclass, so the Hex Blade. And Hex Blade is getting the S tier from me. And there's a lot of reasons for this. Story-wise, I think Hex Blade can be reflavored to be about anything. It seems, as I read it, there's a little bit of a sinister feeling to its mechanics. So probably not a necessarily good aligned creature, but to me it reads like the necessary evil. And honestly, I can see a Hexblade Warlock, like Hexblade abilities coming from a Fiend or an Archfey or a Great Old One or an Undying Patron. I can see it having more than just it's a sentient weapon. But the brilliance of Hexblade is that it outcompetes every other Warlock subclass in literally every dimension. In terms of action economy, Hexblade's Curse is a bonus action, and you would use that in your entire progression. You get to add your proficiency bonus to damage, which means it only gets better the more levels you invest. You get the Accursed Spectre. Armor of Hexes adds to the survivability. Not to mention that it gets access to Shield as a reaction spell, which especially at low levels is really going to make the difference in the Warlock survivability. It also does something that no other Warlock subclass so far has done, which is address the Warlock's Pact boon. The other subclasses have their own flavor and stuff. It's not like targeting one of the boons and encouraging you to use it in the same way that Hexblade does. Also, this is one of the only classes that lets you use a magic stat to fuel your weapon attacks, which is a big deal. Battlesmith lets you do it too, but not as many people know about the Battlesmith. Being able to use to just dump everything in Charisma and use that as your attack damage stat for weapons, and be able to conjure weapons and still do it. The sheer versatility of Hexblade, as well as keeping the damage competitive and keeping the action economy competitive. Hexblade, it doesn't even matter if you do Pact of the Blade. You can be a full caster and be a Hexblade Warlock, and it'll still come off effectively. So for me, Hexblade is the obvious winner here. I like some of the other subclasses, but they just don't compete with this one. Every single time someone goes, I'm thinking about a Warlock, what should I pick? Almost every single time I can be like, Hexblade is what you're going to have the most fun with. And when they say the story doesn't match the story I want for my character, it's like, yeah, but the other ones aren't going to have mechanics that fulfill the story you want for your character either, probably. So, I want to know now, do you agree with my picks? Do you disagree with anything I said? The cat, thank you for listening to the jingle jangle while the cat plays with his little toy here. Watch this, we're gonna see if he jumps up. Ready? Ready? Oh, he's gonna claw me. Woo! Alright, that's it for today, everybody. Have an awesome day. Game responsibly. Bye-bye now. I don't know why I just high-fived the camera.